Xia never expected Zhao Ting to be so hot-headed, storming directly into her office in full-on battle mode. Xia, if you're so bold, come out and face me. Now you care about your reputation? Where was that sense of decency before? Despite the security guards holding her back, Zhao Ting's ferocity made her look like an angry little lobster, leaving the men powerless to do more than just stop her from getting further. Xia, standing by the hallway with a calm expression, took a sip from her cup and casually pulled out her phone, texting Zhang Zheng. Ting Ting came looking for me. Is she misunderstanding something? She seems really upset, and I don't dare to go explain things to her. Even though it was working hours, Zhang Zheng replied quickly. Don't worry, I'll handle it. Xia smirked, putting her phone away as she continued to watch Zhao Ting's outburst like a circus act. You're holding me back? Do you know what kind of woman Xia is? She's a seductress, a shameless homewrecker. Let me in. I'll tear her face apart. Zhao Ting shouted furiously, not caring about the guards' repeated warnings to call the police. She even managed to scratch one of their faces in her struggle. The commotion grew larger, with people from the office peeking out, casting curious glances at Xia. One daring soul even asked her, Xia, is what she's saying true? Xia raised an eyebrow and smiled softly. She playfully responded, Do you think I'd need to seduce a married man? Everyone hesitated, then unanimously said, Of course not. You're too good for that. Guys practically line up to throw themselves at you. Amused by the chorus of compliments, Xia wasn't really paying attention to them. She kept glancing at her watch, calculating when Zhang Zheng would finally arrive. At last, as Zhao Ting reached her breaking point, Zhang Zheng appeared, looking frazzled. Xia smirked. Finally, it was time for her to make her entrance. Xia swiftly made her way downstairs, confronting Zhao Ting before Zhang Zheng caught sight of her. Zhao Ting, a coiled spring waiting to snap, lunged at Xia like a wild beast, grabbing her collar and screaming, You little tramp. Then, with a vicious slap, she delivered a hit loud enough to echo. Zhang Zheng arrived just in time to witness this harrowing scene. He froze for a second before yanking Zhao Ting off Xia, his face contorting with fury as he asked Xia in a tone dripping with concern, Are you alright? Of course, Xia wasn't alright. Her face was bright red from the slap. But she forced a smile, replying, I'm fine. It's my fault. She hadn't finished her sentence when Zhao Ting screamed, Zhang Zheng, I'm still your wife. Ignoring her, Zhang Zheng gave Zhao Ting a cold glare, growling, Shut up. Cowed by his anger, Zhao Ting deflated, though the tremor in her clenched fists and tightly bitten lips showed her resentment. In the end, Zhang Zheng dragged Zhao Ting away, leaving behind an office filled with awkward, silent employees. Xia, ignoring their stares, held an ice pack to her face while texting Zhang Zheng. Don't be too hard on Ting Ting. She's young and just acted impulsively. Zhang Zheng's response was a bit delayed. Had I known she'd act like this, I never would have married her. Xia read his reply and gave a bitter smile. Then, Zhang Zheng messaged again. Xia, I regret it. Can we start over? Start over? How laughable. Xia thought to herself, How dare you bring up getting back together? But after a moment's pause, she quickly texted Zhang Zheng back. Don't say that. Ting Ting's a good girl. You two just need to talk things out. It's not worth causing this much trouble over me. This time, Zhang Zheng replied with a voice message, sounding drained. Xia, I was wrong. I was blind. I made a mistake. I never should have divorced you. Only after marrying Zhao Ting did I realize the one who truly cared about me was you. Xia rubbed her temples, exasperated. She really hadn't expected that after all these years, Zhang Zheng was still as revolting as ever. She hadn't planned on getting involved with him again, but they had recently run into each other at a business function, where Xia had acted professionally, given the circumstances. But perhaps because she'd returned with newfound confidence and allure, Zhang Zheng started to make passes at her. Xia and knew Zhang Zheng's business had thrived post-divorce and that Zhao Ting, who worked in the company, bore much of its weight. However, with the company now facing issues, the couple had been seeking support through various social engagements. Though Xia pretended not to notice, she decided to irk Zhao Ting subtly by alluding to her past familiarity with Zhang Zheng, a form of silent revenge. She had expected them to part ways after that one event, but Zhang Zheng continued to flirt with her, openly neglecting Zhao Ting, and even going so far as to hint at a divorce. History was repeating itself. Only now, Xia and Zhao Ting had swapped roles, while Zhang Zheng remained unchanged, still stubbornly playing the role of the unrepentant scoundrel. Xia vividly remembered how coldly Zhang Zheng had treated her back when he'd first pursued Zhao Ting. Now, seeing him inflict that same cruelty on Zhao Ting felt like cosmic justice. Embracing the chance to exact some retribution, Xia began to subtly imply her social connections, hinting she had the power to help his business. And this fool, thinking Xia still loved him, foolishly wanted to reconnect. If she didn't make the most of this moment, it would be a waste of the years she'd spent enduring pain at the hands of these two. In one text, Xia suggested, "I understand how you feel, and I sympathize with you. But Tingting really is a good person, and you should cherish her. She's what's best for you." Zhang Zheng replied, "She's not what I thought she'd be." Xia responded with a cheerful emoji and wrote, "Couples should communicate well. Don't be so stubborn. Be patient with her. She's younger than you, after all." After a long pause, Zhang Zheng replied, "If only she were as understanding as you." That response was like a thorn driven straight into Xia's heart. She put down her phone, determined to ignore Zhang Zheng for the rest of the day, afraid she'd lose control and unleash her pent-up anger on him. How conveniently Zhang Zheng seemed to forget. The very reason he divorced her in the first place was because he thought she wasn't understanding enough. Xia was Zhang Zheng's senior. Although they were the same age, Xia was a year ahead of him. Their first encounter was quite interesting. Xia worked various jobs to support herself and would occasionally get gigs distributing flyers, which required her to run around campus. Sometimes, when the dormitory management was lax, she would sneak into the boys' dormitory for a stroll. One day, just like any other, she purposely wore boys' clothes and donned a hat to blend in with the boys' dormitory. She was passing out flyers by the door when she coincidentally bumped into Zhang Zheng, who was gaming alone. Zhang Zheng was playing a classic game that Xia was familiar with, so she stood quietly beside him for a while. However, when the game ended, she couldn't help but comment, "You really dragged the team down, didn't you?" Her sudden remark startled Zhang Zheng, who took off his headphones and asked, "Who are you looking for?" Xia took out a flyer and said, "Junior, I'm looking for you. A good horse deserves a good saddle. The reason you're still at this rank is that you lack this equipment." With only one person in the dorm, the atmosphere was easy to engage, and soon Zhang Zheng asked, "How much for this set?" Xian paused for a moment, extended her hand, and said, "Considering how handsome and charming you are, the original price is 3,786 yuan, but now it's only 3,000. What do you think? Isn't it a super discount?" Zhang Zheng nodded eagerly, like a chick pecking at grains, and quickly pulled out the money. Xian took the money, wrote him a receipt, and told him to come by in the afternoon to pick up the goods. Just as she left, Zhang Zheng's roommate came back, paused for a moment upon seeing her, and hurriedly returned to the dorm to grab Zhang Zheng, asking, "Did you buy gaming equipment from that girl?" Xia, curious, stood at the door to eavesdrop. Zhang Zheng, confused, asked, "What's wrong?" "That's senior. The stuff she sells is all refurbished. It's not just overpriced, the quality is poor too. A lot of people in our building bought from her, and if she weren't a girl, some would have wanted to beat her up." Zhang Zheng exclaimed, really still puzzled. The roommate sighed in resignation, but that senior is quite persuasive, and her gaming skills are impressive. It's no wonder you fell for her. Zhang Zheng lowered his head, feeling a bit embarrassed, and muttered, "I didn't think much of it. I just thought she was pretty." Pretty. The roommate looked at him as if he were insane. Are your eyes okay? Zhang Zheng blushed and replied, She really is pretty. After a moment, he shyly added, especially when she counts money. Upon hearing this, Xia An's heart raced, and she fled in a panic. In her haste to escape, she didn't notice that her disguise had failed, and she was caught by the dorm supervisor. If she hadn't run fast, she likely would have faced a thorough scolding, which would have been so embarrassing. She didn't know if it was due to her frantic run, but her heart couldn't settle down, leaving her unsure if it was just a physiological response or the stirrings of youthful infatuation. Nevertheless, she understood that on that day, fate had intertwined her and Zhang Zheng. When Zhang Zheng came to pick up the goods, he had obviously dressed carefully. Each time their eyes met, he would be the first to look away. Xian could clearly see that although his face didn't flush, his ears were red as blood, and his fingers anxiously fiddled with his shirt hem. Despite trying to suppress his emotions, his thoughts were evident. Xian felt secretly pleased. For her, Zhang Zheng truly was her ideal type, but as a girl, she still needed to maintain some modesty. So she intentionally acted a bit aloof, avoiding looking at him or saying much, simply confirming the items before turning to leave. Sure enough, at that moment when she was about to leave, Zhang Zheng grabbed her arm. Their eyes met, and Xian heard the footsteps of love approaching. However, the next moment didn't unfold as she had imagined. Senior, you. Zhang Zheng hesitated before looking down and awkwardly saying, Your pants are dirty. Xia and then realized what had happened. Her period had arrived, leading to this embarrassing situation. How humiliating. Her face turned as red as fire, and just as she was about to find a hole to hide in, Zhang Zheng took off his jacket and tied it around her waist, saying, Senior, don't worry. I promise I won't tell anyone about today. Feigning calm, Xian replied, I know you wouldn't dare. After that, she turned and left in big strides. What Zhang Zheng didn't know was that as soon as she turned away, the calm expression on her face had twisted into one of distress. And Xian had no idea that at that very moment, Zhang Zheng watched her back with a faint smile, already having developed feelings for her. Later, Xian washed the jacket and returned it to Zhang Zheng, who then took the opportunity to invite her to dinner. She, in turn, suggested they go to the movies as repayment. Both Zhang Zheng and Xia had ordinary looks and came from regular families, and their similar circumstances allowed them to quickly connect on a deeper level. Love seen through the lens of youth doesn't require grandiose plots. Just a look or a gesture is enough to fall into it. And so, through their interactions, they confirmed their relationship and eventually married after graduation. During this time, they did have fights and broke up, but they always reconciled, leading Xia to believe that there was no insurmountable hurdle between them. As long as they communicated well, every problem was solvable. However, she later discovered that one day, Zhang Zheng would be unwilling to communicate with her, and the vows they once made would fade over time, eventually becoming mere bubbles that vanished without a trace. Their conflict erupted in the 3rd year after marriage. Zhang Zheng, who used to come home on time, either returned late from drinking or didn't come home at all, filling Xian with unease. She asked him several times, only to be dismissed with his reply, "It's work-related." As a woman, Xia knew something was wrong. Is there some problem at work? Or is there something with our parents? Zhang Zheng frowned at her words. Can't you wish for something good for me? Can't I relax a bit after work? Xian was taken aback by Zhang Zheng's fiery temper, but she didn't have time to feel aggrieved. She just tried to comfort him more. If there's something difficult, don't shoulder it alone. Talking to me might help, right? All I need is for you to shut up and let me be quiet for a while. Zhang Zheng glared at her fiercely, then turned his back to her, clearly indicating that he no longer wanted to communicate. Xia An's long-suppressed emotion surged. She pressed her voice and asked, "Am I really that annoying?" "That's what you said." Zhang Zheng replied without looking at her. Tears welled up in Xia An's eyes as she quietly slipped off the bed and sat in the living room all night. Because it was cold at night, Xia caught a cold. She made breakfast for Zhang Zheng despite feeling unwell, but he didn't even glance at it. Just before leaving, he said to her, "There's a big project at work, so I'll be staying at the office to work overtime. You're sick, so take your medicine, and I'll come back once you're better." He said it with a look of concern for her, but his words were sharp. "The company can't function without me. You just take a sick leave. If I get sick, it'll affect a lot of people's livelihoods." Xia was stunned by his words, so much so that she forgot about the porridge on the stove. When she finally snapped back to reality, the pot was nearly on fire. He hadn't been like this before. As she cleaned the kitchen, the thought echoed in her mind. But as she looked at the burnt and unrecognizable porridge, tears fell. In that moment, she felt their relationship was like that pot of porridge, losing all desire for further tasting. In the past, when she'd hurt her finger while reading, Zhang Zheng would care for her. Now, he was not only indifferent but also worried she might infect him. It was just a minor cold. If she were to fall seriously ill, would he immediately cut ties with her or even abandon her? Once such dark thoughts took root, fear spread throughout her mind. Xia repeatedly told herself not to be petty. Perhaps Zhang Zheng was just overwhelmed by work stress. But that reasoning wasn't enough to convince her. She too had heavy work pressure and had to care for their small family and both sets of parents. Xia took a day off and rested at home for a while, but eventually couldn't resist visiting Zhang Zheng at his company. He had switched companies a year ago, and she had never been there. In the past, she had asked to visit, but Zhang Zheng always found excuses to refuse. Feeling aggrieved, she had once asked him if he thought she was unpresentable. Initially, he would comfort her, but over time, he would dismiss her with a quick, "Think what you want," and storm out. At times, Xia felt she was being too sensitive. After all, men and women think differently. But at that moment, unless she saw it with her own eyes, she could hardly believe that the vibrant man she had seen was her husband, Zhang Zheng. It had been a long time since he came home with a tired demeanor, as if he were returning from prison, barely reacting to the meals she prepared with care. If she spoke a little too much, he would look at her with the eyes of an enemy, sending a piercing glare that felt unforgiving. Now, through the company's entrance, she saw Zhang Zheng laughing with a young, beautiful woman, casually touching her face and even playfully hitting her backside. It was lunchtime, and people were bustling about, so no one noticed Xia lurking in the corner. Not even Zhang Zheng, who had once sworn that he would see her first no matter where she stood. Xia squinted, suddenly feeling a chill. Then blackness overtook her as she lost consciousness. The harsh reality made Xia reluctant to wake up. It was merely a fever she could easily recover from, yet it felt like a terminal illness, leaving her feeling hopeless and lifeless. However, the hospital was not where she wanted to be. Every inch of that place was marked with sorrow, making her desperate to escape at once. Most importantly, Xia wanted to ask Zhang Zheng directly, to get a clear answer from him. About a week later, Xia finally saw Zhang Zheng again. He looked exhausted as he pushed open the door, complaining as he tugged at his tie and shouted, "Get me a glass of water. I'm dying of thirst." He flopped onto the sofa, a puddle of fatigue. Xia emerged from her room, observing his lifeless form. She glanced at the kettle but didn't move, instead leaning against the sofa, her expression serious as she asked, "Did you finish your overtime?" "What else? You want me to just keep working until I drop dead?" Zhang Zheng snapped, frustration evident in his voice. His droopy head made his speech awkward and sarcastic. "Where's my water? Why haven't you poured it for me?" Xia remained unfazed and asked again, "What's your relationship with Zhao Ting?" Upon hearing Zhao Ting, Zhang Zheng immediately perked up. He straightened and stared at Xia, his face flashing with guilt before turning to anger. He narrowed his eyes, coldly responding, "How do you know Zhao Ting?" Before Xia could reply, he added quickly, "You were following me? I went to your company to bring you lunch a while ago, and I saw you two together," she replied honestly. "I think your relationship isn't normal." Xia expected Zhang Zheng to deny it vehemently, but he only paused for a moment before coldly snorting. Think what you want. He then collapsed back onto the sofa. Think what I want. Xia bit her lip, trying to maintain her composure. Zhang Zheng, I need an explanation from you. I have nothing to explain. You women are always overthinking. Even if we men explain everything clearly, you might not believe us anyway. Think what you want. As long as you don't make a scene, it doesn't matter. Zhang Zheng's indifference hurt Xia's heart even more. She gritted her teeth, saying, So you admit that your relationship with her isn't normal? Are you done? Zhang Zheng exploded, standing up and pointing a finger at Xia's nose, angrily shouting, Are you just looking for trouble? I'm already exhausted from work, and you want to cause more issues? Can't you just be a little more understanding? Do you even know what a wife's duty is? This was the first time Zhang Zheng had treated her like this since they met, and in an instant, Xian was taken aback. While she was still dazed, Zhang Zheng turned and left the house. If not for the sound of the door slamming behind him, she might not have snapped back to reality. In the early days of their romance, Xian often felt insecure due to her intense feelings for Zhang Zheng, so she used to secretly observe him at his internship company. At that time, even though there were many beautiful young women flirting with him, he always handled it gracefully, maintaining a reasonable distance from the opposite sex. Now, however, he had swiftly become one of those greasy middle-aged men, not only flirting but also betraying their marriage. She had lost track of how many cold wars they had experienced. The emotional abuse within their marriage was equally painful. Xian felt that if this continued, she would eventually go insane. Think what you want. She had made up her mind. Xia first met Zhao Ting in a coffee shop. Zhao Ting wasn't the obedient and sensible person Xia had imagined. Instead, she was quite arrogant, always holding her chin up as if she were the legitimate wife and Xia was the mistress intruding on someone else's marriage. I'm straightforward in what I say and do, Zhao Ting said lightly as she stirred her coffee, a subtle smile gracing her lips. Her eyes, artfully painted, were full of allure. To put it simply, I'm going to marry Zhang Zheng. Xian didn't show much surprise. She merely replied softly, So, I should get a divorce, right? Zhao Ting laughed. I'm making you get a divorce for your own good. Otherwise, staying in such a state of mourning isn't a solution, is it? In truth, Zhao Ting was only a few years younger than Xian. However, compared to the gentle and slow-to-warm Xian, Zhao Ting appeared more vivacious and full of energy. I just want to know when it started between you and him and how serious it has become. Xian maintained an unchanging expression, as calm as if she were discussing the weather with a friend. When did it start? Zhao Ting pushed her untouched coffee forward and pretended to look innocently at Xian, slowly saying, It was when I first joined the company. As for how far we've progressed, Zhao Ting paused deliberately, then placed her hand on her belly, smiling blissfully. I'm pregnant. Xian simply gazed at Zhao Ting's belly. Oh, is it Zhang Zheng's? Zhao Ting's face darkened immediately, furrowing her brow. What do you mean by that? Just what you think it means. You. What? At that moment, Xian seemed to come alive, a smile gradually appearing on her face as she picked up her glass of water and said, Since you two are expecting a child, I should give the child a proper greeting, right? Before she could finish, the water in her glass was splashed all over Zhao Ting. What the hell are you doing? Zhao Ting stood up, shouting, which attracted the attention of the staff. Xian waved her hand, looking at the waiter and all the curious onlookers. What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a legitimate wife humiliating a mistress before? Her words rendered everyone speechless, and only Xian remained calmly seated, curious about how the situation would unfold. Xian, you'll regret this. Zhang Zheng won't let you off. Won't let me off. Xian retorted, lifting her coffee cup. Zhao Ting instinctively covered her face, but Xian merely smiled disdainfully and took a sip before placing the cup down on the table, the clatter of the cup on the surface, making Zhao Ting shudder. Clearly, Zhao Ting was on the brink of collapse. She pulled out her phone, sobbing as she called Zhang Zheng, venting her grievances and demanding he come over to confront Xian. Zhang Zheng, come over. Xian knew Zhang Zheng could hear her on the other end. Let's talk about the divorce. Zhang Zheng soon arrived, heartbroken upon seeing the disheveled Zhao Ting. However, before he could question Xian, she swiftly slapped him across the face. This slap left everyone in the room stunned, especially Zhang Zheng, who remained frozen in disbelief for a long time before finding his voice to ask, "You hit me?" "I meant to hit the woman next to you, but since I don't hit women, I had to settle for you," Xian said as she picked up her handbag and addressed both of them. "Divorce, the sooner the better. But I won't give up a single penny of the assets." After the divorce, Xian took the opportunity of a work assignment to a different city and made new friends. As for Zhang Zheng, it was impossible for her not to care, but it was simply because she couldn't let go of the pain he had caused her. Looking back on their past felt like it happened in another lifetime. Xian never expected she could someday smile at Zhang Zheng again. At this moment, they were having dinner at an expensive restaurant. Zhang Zheng, sipping wine, looked weary and distant. He spoke almost foolishly. "Why did I ever agree to divorce you?" Xian didn't want to look at him, only quietly gazing at her water glass. Maybe it was just fate. Back then, Zhao Ting told me she was pregnant, but it was all a lie. She had been deceiving me the whole time. Zhang Zheng set down his glass and suddenly grasped Xian's hand. "She's just too good at acting. I was fooled by her innocent facade. I really lost my mind. Zhang Zheng's speech became increasingly incoherent, yet he held onto Xian's hand as if afraid to let go. He eventually circled back to his original point. "And I'm planning to divorce Zhao Ting. Can we get back together?" Xian remained silent. "I've thought about it for a long time. I still love you. Throughout these years apart, I've always missed you. You are the only one who is gentle and considerate, who knows how to take care of me. You're truly the only one who understands me in this world. Please give me a chance to make amends." Zhang Zheng's tone was sincere, his eyes filled with tears, almost on the verge of kneeling. Yet Xian's heart remained unmoved. What Zhang Zheng had been expressing all along was that, compared to Zhao Ting, Xian was more manageable and still had some utility. Someone like Zhao Ting, though bright and lovely, was simple-minded and couldn't meet Zhang Zheng's standards for a wife. It was only a matter of time before their relationship would explode in conflict. With a gentle gaze, Xian looked at Zhang Zheng and said, "You always have the right to choose to divorce." "Really?" Zhang Zheng's excitement mirrored the joy he had when he first proposed to Xian, yet in this moment, only he was truly thrilled. Xian nodded. "Go and clear things up with Ting Ting. I'll wait for your good news." And enough of that. Do you know Investor Chen? I've already contacted him, and he expressed interest in investing in your company. Your current troubles will soon be resolved. Zhang Zheng was moved. As expected, you're the best to me. Not only are you willing to give me a second chance, but you also found someone to help save my company. You've practically saved my life twice. Xian smiled silently. Zhang Zheng held her hand tightly, looking confident. "Don't worry, I'll definitely get divorced from her soon and come to find you." Xian smiled and said, "I'll wait for you." As Xian expected, Zhao Ting would never agree to divorce Zhang Zheng, because Zhang Zheng had not completely fallen apart yet. She could not give up her status as a wealthy lady. "Xian, I think you're just looking for trouble." Xian had evaded Zhao Ting for a long time, but this time Zhao Ting finally found her. On the surface, Xian appeared surprised and fearful, but inside, she was very calm. The show she had arranged was about to begin, and Zhao Ting's timing was just perfect. "Let's sit down and talk," Xian said, pretending to be genuinely guilty as she shrugged her shoulders, bowed her head, and pulled out a chair for Zhao Ting before shutting the door to the private room. At that moment, however, Zhang Zheng rushed in. He first looked at Xia and with affectionate eyes, then angrily walked over to Zhao Ting, grabbing her arm and saying, "Let's go. Hurry up. Where are we going?" Zhao Ting gasped, "Zhang Zheng, are you crazy? I'm pregnant, and you want to divorce me? Who knows if this is true or not? You've lied to me before." "Zhang Zheng." Zhao Ting stood up, pounding the table with her fists, glaring with wide eyes. "We can go to the hospital for a checkup." Zhang Zheng remained unmoved, continuing to act like a rogue. "Even if you are pregnant, it doesn't necessarily mean it's mine." Zhao Ting looked at Zhang Zheng in disbelief, not expecting him to insult her like this. She then went mad, fighting with Zhang Zheng, but the difference in strength between men and women was evident. Within seconds, she was pushed to the ground. "This marriage has to end," Zhang Zheng said with a fierce tone. "If it weren't for you seducing me, would I have divorced and to marry you?" Zhao Ting sobbed, sitting on the floor, alternately cursing Zhang Zheng and Xian, completely turning into a pitiful, abandoned woman. Xian looked at her indifferently, then turned to Zhang Zheng. Zhang Zheng looked at her with eyes full of tenderness, wanting to approach her. But Xian's gaze had already drifted past him to the person at the door. "Mr. Chen, do you think someone like her is worth helping?" Seeing Mr. Chen was like finding a savior to Zhang Zheng, who hurried over to shake hands and greet him, but Mr. Chen disdainfully avoided him. Zhang Zheng felt a bit awkward, but continued to flatter Mr. Chen. Just as a smile was forming on his face, Xian spoke up first. "I have thoroughly investigated. There are indeed quality safety issues with Zhang Zheng's company's products. It's not a smear campaign from competitors." Xian stepped forward earnestly. "I know you, Mr. Chen, are a kind person, but Zhang Zheng has issues both in character and in his products." Zhang Zheng looked at Xian in disbelief, anxiously whispering, "Anan, what are you doing? Aren't you here to help me?" Xian pretended not to hear and continued to speak to Mr. Chen. "I believe in your professionalism, and I won't help someone with such poor quality." "Xian." Zhang Zheng was furious. "Don't slander me without basis." "Slander?" Xian looked at him with pity and then said to Mr. Chen, "In terms of character, Mr. Chen just saw Zhang Zheng's actions. As for the product, I have direct evidence that can be made public shortly." Zhang Zheng was completely panicked. "Mr. Chen, Mr. Chen remained cold and silent, glanced at Xian, and then turned to leave. Zhang Zheng knew it was useless to chase after him now, and turned to take it out on Xian. "So you approached me from the very beginning just to dig a pit for me?" Xian replied indifferently, "If your character was fine and your products were fine, could I have dug this pit at all? You saw it just now. You clearly set up Mr. Chen. Do you think he will let you go?" "I'm just here on a business trip. Mr. Chen doesn't have any influence over me. At most, he'll think I'm very scheming and won't associate with me anymore." "But what about you? Once I release the evidence, do you think you can still make a comeback?" Zhang Zheng was completely defeated, sitting in the chair as if his soul had been sucked away, muttering to himself, "Wrong, wrong. Everything is wrong." After watching the situation unfold quietly, Zhao Ting finally stood up. The tears on her face had long since dried, and she seemed to have made an important decision. "Zhang Zheng, didn't you say you wanted a divorce?" Zhao Ting said as she walked away, without ever looking at the slumped Zhang Zheng. "Then let's divorce." Zhang Zheng remained unmoved, seemingly still in shock, while Zhao Ting had already left decisively. Only the two of them were left in the private room, the air filled with the silence of a battlefield aftermath, yet the remnants of smoke could still be faintly sensed. Xian wanted to say something more to Zhang Zheng, like scolding him again, but looking at his dejected state, she felt there was nothing left to say. "Xian, you're really ruthless." That was the last thing Zhang Zheng said to Xian. Xian smiled faintly and casually closed the door to the private room. Before Zhang Zheng's company announced bankruptcy, Zhao Ting had already left him with a divorce certificate in hand. As for the child, of course, it would not be kept. It was said that Zhang Zheng desperately begged Zhao Ting not to divorce him, but she refused. Later, he went into hiding to escape his debts, disappearing completely amidst various troubles. He lost everything. When she heard all this, Xian was on vacation abroad, and for a moment, it seemed she could hear Zhang Zheng accusing her. Xian, you're really ruthless. Is she ruthless? Perhaps.